Healthcare these days is very much about following guidelines rather than using your brain. If a new patient comes into hospital, you kind of look up the guidelines rather than thinking, well, let's think about this patient. Let's assess, plan, implement, and evaluate on a personalized basis.
We have a special guest. I want to get right to him. Dr. John Campbell, retired British nurse educator and YouTuber, known for his informative videos on healthcare topics, particularly during the COVID-19 pandemic. He holds a PhD in nursing from the University of Bolton and previously worked as a nursing lecturer at the University of Cumbria. Through his YouTube channel, which has amassed more than 3 million subscribers, he provides evidence-based explanations of complex medical issues, making them accessible to the general public. He's also the author of several nursing textbooks. Please welcome to the show, Dr. John Campbell. Hey, John, how are you?
Hi, Jimmy. We certainly try and do those things, and it's great to meet you at last. Destiny has finally brought us together into this conversation. So no idea what we're going to talk about, but certainly looking forward to it.
I'm very excited. I've been a big fan and follower of your show. Your show has been a real touchstone for a lot of people, me included. And so my audience loves when I share your stuff, and I appreciate that I can share your stuff. So I just wanted
no, thank you for using it. It's great. You've used it several times, and it's good to see it bounced on, and especially into the States.
Well, it's you seem to be the only one who's doing such great work like this to make it accessible to people like me. And so let me just start off with so I became aware of you because of COVID, although you've been, a teacher and informing people for a lot longer than that. But you were the only place I could go to for actually unbiased truth and objective reporting on what was happening during COVID. When did you, now I know you're vaccinated. I also am vaccinated. I got vaccine injured. I know you had.
I did too. I believe I did as well.
You had a blood pressure issue, right?
Yeah, I believe so.
And you never had blood pressure issue before you took the COVID vaccine?
Never had it before. So I took the third vaccine, and I check my blood pressure regularly anyway. And about a month after the third vaccine, I checked my blood pressure, and it had gone up to about 160 over about 90, 95. Then I went on blood pressure meds, and it came back down again. And I stayed on blood pressure meds probably for about 2 years. And then I started going a bit dizzy, which means my blood pressure was going down. Checked my blood pressure, and it was quite low. So now I'm only on very, very low doses of blood pressure meds now, or sometimes none. So it seemed to last for a couple of years. It was really strange. It went up, managed it fine with meds. It was okay. Then now it seems to be all right again. So, and I've talked to a few people who've had vaccine injuries of different types, and some it seems to last for a long time, and many people are still suffering severely as we speak. But others do seem to recover after a couple of years. I don't think it's any good reflection on the vaccine. It just shows what an amazing human body we've been equipped with, Jimmy, that, it can recover even from the most egregious type of insult over time.
Yeah, my blood pressure also spiked. It was at 180 over 120, which I think was...
that's high, yeah.
That's very high. So, and I was getting bad headaches. But so for me, that's what... I just bought into the propaganda. I told people to wear masks. I told people to get their vaccine. I told people to social distance. I even had a fight with my brother over it, and which kind of, we didn't talk for a long time, which was very unfortunate. But we're back together again, thank God. But so when I got my second jab, I never got better. I just felt like I was sick the whole time. I had nerve damage in my neck. I had headaches and body. And so that's what made me, so I tweeted about it. And I said, it's been 5 weeks since my last jab, and I'm still feeling all these symptoms. Boy, did people come at me for that. They're like wanting me to shut up about it. But luckily, a doctor saw the post, and he got me treated. And I found out I was vaccine injured. So that was what made me start to look into it. And I brought on Dr. Robert Malone, who was the inventor of the mRNA vaccine technology. Mm-hmm. And he explained everything about the vaccine to me, about immune escape and a leaky vaccine. And you can't vaccinate your way out of a pandemic. So that was like such an eye-opener for me. And so then I figured out that the vaccine didn't stop transmission or contraction, which I got a strike for saying that. It's a fact. And YouTube gave me a penalty for that. Now, so that's what made me suspicious and start looking into it. What was it that made you suspicious that we might be being lied to about COVID?
Yeah, sure. The strike I got was for the interview with, I think it was Pierre Corey, when we were talking about ivermectin, which YouTube doesn't let us talk about now, thankfully. So my story is basically I trained nurses for 29 years. And because you're doing like professional education, and we train nurse practitioners and all sorts of people like that, it was vital that we kind of followed the government guidelines. So the government would send new guidelines out on, say, resuscitation. We'd learn those and we'd go and teach them. Or new guidelines on anaphylaxis, we'd learn the guidelines and we'd go and teach what the guidelines said. So we had this lifetime of following guidelines. And I actually knew some of the people that wrote the guidelines, or some of the guidelines, and they were pretty good. You know, they did their best. They did an analysis of the literature. They put that into the guidelines. We have this group called the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, as it's called now, which of course is a suspicious title. Anything with excellence in the title has got to be a bit suspect. But so it's a bit like whenever you've got democratic in the title of a country, you can be pretty sure it's not very democratic. And anyway, we had these guidelines and they seemed to make sense. And for a long time, I believe they did, expert opinion. So when the pandemic started, I basically followed on from these guidelines. We had the Prime Minister, and it was my assumption that he was well informed by the Chief Scientific Officer and the Chief Medical Officer and other scientists. But then I started noticing things which weren't quite right. And it's one of these things, you know, Jimmy, there's a saying in medicine that the retrospectoscope casts a clear white light. You know, when you're looking back, it all becomes really obvious. But at the time, it wasn't, at least to me. And of course, you know, I kicked myself for taking so long to realize that things weren't what they seemed. The thing that really started me being suspicious in sort of mid-2021, I guess, was starting to talk to people that were vaccine injured. And again, to begin with, this didn't really surprise me because we knew all drugs had adverse events. And I actually got the third one of these wretched things before I realized it was a bit of a racket. It was about a week after I got the third one, I realized that things weren't what they appeared to be. So it was a bit of a shock, really. What? These national guidelines are wrong? Yeah, they're wrong. I believe they're wrong. And then when I got that more realistic mindset, a lot of things started falling into place. And as well, at that time, I started talking to world-leading experts. So, you know, we've talked to like one of the world's leading immunologists, Professor Clancy in Australia. You know, one of the world's leading oncologists, Professor Dalgleish in the United Kingdom. And they were saying things again which were inconsistent. But when they said it, you know, because I've done a science degree years ago, you know, you think, oh, wait a minute, that makes sense now. And at the time, I think my sort of blind obedience to authority overruled my sort of analytical thinking. I was still in a subservient mindset, but that's changed now because a lot of the things that were done were suboptimal, to put it mildly. And some things we did, of course, were blatantly harmful. The risk-benefit analysis from the vaccine was never favorable in my view. You know, Joseph Freeman did a reanalysis of the original trial data, which shouldn't have needed done really, but it was done. He was a doctor in Louisiana at the time. And basically, you know, about 1 in 800 people were getting serious adverse events. This should have been more than enough to have the vaccine withdrawn, more than enough, and yet people persisted with it. You know, the saying, when you're in a hole, stop digging. But they just kept on digging. And although the backpedaling has been there now, it's still there to an extent. And people, of course, don't want to admit that they got things wrong. But really basic things wrong. Things I said at the time, for example, the way the injections were done weren't right. They were sticking the needle in and not aspirating the needle. I mean, I learned to do that. My charge nurse taught me to do that when I was 18 years old. You know, and so, if you didn't do it, you'd probably get sacked. You know, it was but.
So why do you think
that just didn't make sense?
Why do you think that's such a simple thing to make? So tell people what aspiration of the needle is, and Can you tell us why would they be resistant to telling people to aspirate the needle when they're giving you a vaccine?
Yeah. So when you're giving an injection into a muscle, the aim is to put that injection into a muscle, not into a vein. Because some things, if you inject it into a vein, or even worse, into an artery, it can have really bad side effects. So, for example, if you inject something into an artery, it can cause what we call distal necrosis. Things that where that blood goes can actually kill that tissue. Giving an intra-arterial injection is really dangerous. But if you give an intravenous injection, that's going to go into the systemic circulation. It's going to go all around the body. Now, sometimes you want that, of course, but most times you don't, because you want the level of drug to rise slowly in the blood. So when you're giving it intramuscle, you want it to go into the muscle. So you stick your needle in. Now, we haven't got X-ray eyes. We haven't got ultrasound eyes. So how do we know we're in a muscle? How do we know we're not in a vein? Because, of course, the reason muscle is alive is because it's got arteries and veins taking blood to and from it. It's got to have a blood supply. So what we do is we stick the needle in and then we pull back on the plunger. Now, if it's in a vein, the red stuff comes back into the syringe and you can see it. You can see the blood. If it's not, you pull it back. If you don't get any blood going in, then you inject it. Now, the vast majority of times you stick a needle into a muscle, you don't get any blood back. I think I can remember getting it about once. And most nurses you talk to, I'll have seen it once or twice in their career. Probably 1%, 2%, 3% of intramuscular injections, you might get blood back. Depends who you're injecting, of course. If it's someone, young and muscular and athletic with lots of blood supply to the muscles, you could be hitting it much more frequently, in young athletic men, for example, or, bodybuilders down the gym. So you've got to make sure it's in the muscle so it's not absorbed into the body quickly. And yet the Green Book in my country, which is like, it's like the Bible really of how you give injections, it said don't aspirate injections. Now, how that got there is a mystery. I must have talked to a couple hundred people about this, doctors and nurses. And when you explain this, they say, well, why wouldn't you aspirate? Why wouldn't you check you're in a muscle? And it seems, it's hard to put this together, but it seems a while ago, the World Health Organization changed the guidelines for pediatric vaccination because they wanted to be able to inject the kids, do it quickly without hurting. And that's another point. When you see people, I remember Joe Biden getting his injection and the guy goes, and it was like the whole thing was done in about a second, as if he was taking a pride at how quick he was, like gunfight at the OK Corral or something. This is how quickly I can do this. But of course, when you squirt it in quickly, the pressure is going to be much higher. And when you've got high pressure going into a muscle, then you're going to damage the local blood vessels and you're going to get more intravascular absorption as well. So that's another no-no. But it seems the World Health Organization changed the guidelines for pediatric injections so we didn't hurt kids when we were injecting them. And somehow, which I can't trace, somehow that got transposed, conflated with adult vaccinations, and it ended up that you don't need to aspirate, which is just ridiculous. You have to give the right drug via the right dose, the right dose of the right drug via the right route at the right time to the right patient. And if you're not aspirating, you don't know if you're giving it into the right place or not. It just seems very, very hard to explain. But because it's in the guidelines, people follow it. Healthcare these days is very much about following guidelines rather than using your brain. If a new patient comes into hospital, you kind of look up the guidelines rather than thinking, well, let's think about this patient. Let's assess, plan, implement, and evaluate on a personalized basis. Rather than that, I'm afraid people just tend to follow guidelines.
And so that change to stop recommending aspiration of when you vaccinate someone, that came from the WHO. Now, we've learned,
as far as I can tell, that's where it came into the British guidelines. Yeah.
October 19th, we'll be in Irvine, California. Then we'll be in Australia. Then we'll be in Burbank, California, the day after Thanksgiving. And then Pottstown, Pennsylvania, December 6th. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets.